In the age of AI, where the potential for their consciousness looms over, we ought to really think what consciousness is. We are told by everyone every day that we're just biological machines. The current materialist dogma reduces our being to nothing more than processes in the brain. But look around you. From the phone that you're using, to the laptop, to the car you go to work with, to buildings and skyscrapers you pass by every day, to the house that you live in. All of that, all of human civilization, was created by consciousness. They see consciousness as reactive, built for survival, mechanistic, but they fail to understand the real qualitative aspects of it. They perceive consciousness as an observer of reality, but this is far from the truth. We see now that even in our foundations of knowledge, our consciousness is what allowed us to even dissect the secrets of reality. Our consciousness co-creates, it shapes it. All the things we created was consciousness investigating reality, dissecting it, then projecting it. It acts like a feedback loop. We perceive, internalize, project, and create. Like an artist who paints, his work carries his own essence. That piece of him is within that painting. Even a scientist who creates their own theories, a part of that discovery comes from their own rich, qualitative, subjective experience. Our inventions are all pieces of ourselves, where we project our identities onto the world. We use the physical to justify the metaphysical. Welcome, conscious colleagues. This is the Philosophy of Power, a movement dedicated to understanding the power of consciousness and how it shapes us and reality. First, let's ask the question, what even is consciousness? The current definition, it's the awareness of oneself in relation to the world. We perceive that we are beings that exist in reality. We perceive and we act with intention. But for the longest time, consciousness has always been a mystery to us. In the early days, they viewed consciousness as something that is akin to myths, spiritual ideas, but nothing ever concrete. There were several speculations, but one of the most prominent philosophical questions of consciousness came from the philosopher René Descartes. The story starts with the awakening of a dream. Descartes was anxious. The dream he felt, it felt so vivid, so real. He began to ask, what if I'm still dreaming? How do I know if I'm awake? And so, he began to investigate everything. He employed the tactic of extreme doubt and began to question, what if all reality is nothing more than an illusion? What would I be if all of it was not real? How do I know if I am conscious or not? And so, he finally arrived in a strange conclusion. Even if everything was not real, by the act of questioning, there had to be someone questioning it. That subject who questions it must be real, must be conscious. And that's what consciousness is. The one that questions, the one that thinks. It is a being of its own will to investigate and think and reflect upon the entire structure of existence. And thus concludes, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. For that I am thinking about thinking, there must be a thinker that does the thinking. And so, this created a new view of what it means to be conscious. This already shows you that despite the falsehood of objective reality, subjective reality is still present and still strong. However, this kind of thinking was taken in a different direction. Rather than positing that consciousness came from the subjective, they would turn this into that consciousness is relegated to rationalism and thinking. That to be conscious, one must be able to think, to reflect. But this turns consciousness into an activity rather than an essence of being. To be conscious, one must think. It's a very human bias that prevents us from being able to understand consciousness beyond human perspective. And there are other animals that do not display the same behaviors as we do. Do they not constitute as conscious beings? Regardless, these philosophical questions would be the bedrock for our understanding of consciousness for years to come. These philosophical questions did not satisfy our cravings for knowledge. We wanted something more concrete, something measurable. And as humanity developed, so did our knowledge about who we are. Advancements in science enabled us to dissect ourselves, our bodies, and really learn the architecture of who we are. We learned all the organs, all the components, the functions, every single nook and cranny. And most importantly, we discovered the power of our brains and mapped out every single region and every structure and every component that's in them. We understood that it acts like the command center, unlike previous myths that thought that consciousness existed within the heart. However, the mysteries of consciousness still remain. We know how all the components that dictate our behavior and functions. But despite all of this, we still don't know how all of this, all these parts, translate to a rich subjective experience. Neuroscience tells us the quantitative aspects that make up our brain. But none of this correlates to our personal qualitative experience in the world. This is called the hard problem of consciousness. Let's take the color red. Neuroscience explains how we absorb that information of red. Photons hit the retina, chemical reactions, then that data is sent to a certain region of the brain and processed to create that perception of red. But what it doesn't tell you is how a subject feels that color red. For example, let's take two people, person A and person B. Both of them have that same mechanistic component of perceiving red. All the parts, all the processes, completely identical. However, if you ask them both how they feel about that red, they might give a different answer. Person A might say when they see red, they feel love, tranquility, oneness, care. Then person B might see violence, blood, war, hatred. You see, one does not just perceive the color, but they feel it. These feelings invoke a certain memory or an event that are associated with that person's own identity. This qualitative subjective experience is called qualia. It is the richness of experience through the lens of a conscious being. It is the redness of red, how a person feels. Qualia depends not on processes alone, but that single entity of subjectivity that cannot be reduced to numbers or components or computations. The person's entire being of self, their experience in reality and who they are, their true selves, and how they deal with the world, how they internalize that is qualia. We can try to map out the brain signatures of certain behavioral aspects of that person, but we cannot truly know what it's like to be that person, and that's qualia. We can't negate that person's free will. We don't just absorb data, we feel it. It's qualitative, not quantitative. It's not reducible. However, the common materialistic view fails to understand this. They subject beings to reactive machines. And this is the problem, because this mechanistic view of consciousness often leads to harm. It's called bioessentialism. And this kind of language has used to determine and negate the free will of certain individuals. Most notable example, the Atlantic slave trade, where they used eugenics and scientific racism, measuring the person's skulls and their biological components, to subject them to inferiority. In any case, this mechanistic view of consciousness was used to negate people's own subjective experience. But we will delve deeper into this in a different video. We just have to know that we need to have a more holistic perspective of consciousness that deals with this qualitative experience, not quantitative. But I'm not just satisfied with experience. I believe there's much more. People don't just experience something and move on. We internalize that. It becomes a part of who we are. And when I say internalize, I don't just mean it just goes into our memory. And no, each experience we have, we process that to our own specific subjectivity. In fact, speaking of memories, if an event is not memorable, that's not going to be really hardwired to that person's memory. You take two people eating ice cream. One person eats ice cream for the first time, one person has eaten ice cream for the longest time. One makes it a special memory, and the other is just another day at the beach. That's why subjective experience matters. We're not dealing with objectivity when it comes to consciousness. We're dealing with beings that exist, who they are and what they express, what their internalized worlds are. And in fact, imagination, are one of the most powerful tools of our consciousness. But the story doesn't end there. Let's go back in time to our ancient cousins. When their fellow tribesmen died, they didn't just bury them. They gave them specific tools and trinkets that were meant to represent who they were. If one of their tribesmen were warriors, they would bury him with a sword. But they would also bury him with other trinkets. Maybe they saw him drinking water from a conch shell, or maybe he was wearing a specific necklace. We didn't just create tools. We look at the evolution of humanity in this kind of problem-solving basis, but our ancient ancestors were artists. They built jewelry, they built trinkets, they built toys, and these things did not have any survival mechanism. They were meant to express who they were, what they saw in the world. When they created that necklace, it was a part of who they were. Their essence was there. Their internalized subjective experience projected to reality. With this view, qualia doesn't just end with subjective experience, it expands with internalization and projection. This is why expression matters. It's the bridge where the self, the internal self, meets the external world. You look at a painting and you speak it in a mechanistic lens and you're seeing it as, oh, they were just making it because they wanted to warn the others. Really to reduce that qualitative aspect of those cavemen who lived on those turbulent times. No, they were showing their story. They were showing each other what kind of lives they lived. That's the power of consciousness. The power of consciousness translates the internal subjective self into the external world, shaping reality to its will, showcasing it exists. It's not just, I am aware that I am existing. No, I exist and I will tell the world I exist and I matter. That's consciousness. So, this concludes our first episode. Thank you for lending me your ears, and I hope to see you to our next philosophical journey delving into the mysteries of consciousness. Dream well, my fellow conscious colleagues, and see you on the next episode.